to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, how to get it just right. Thank you so much for joining us for another hour of exciting and insightful conversation so that we can continue our journey of transformation. As we get started, let's take a moment and think about why we come together as a Goldilocks community and why we are thematically centered around unleashing our inner Goldilocks. To me, Goldilocks symbolizes the ability to find that perfect balance because she's telling us how she wants things out of life and how she goes about getting it just right. She doesn't want her porridge too hot or too cold, right? If it's too hot, you can't taste it. If it's too cold, you're not going to enjoy it. When you sit down, she knows that her chair needs to be just right so that it's not too hard, not too soft, so that she can sit back and watch TV or whatever it is she's trying to do. When she goes to lay down, the bed has to be just right. Not too big, not too small, not too hard, not too soft. Imagine when each of us were that little child. As human beings, we come into this world knowing exactly what we want and how to wrap every other person around our little finger and make them give us what we want when we want. Even before we learn to talk, with all our body language and facial expressions, we figured it out. Somewhere along the way, societal preconditioning and what we are told and what we convince ourselves, we've forgotten that. We've let go of that. And we find ourselves in adulthood wondering why we can't succeed when all we want to do is accomplish our goals, but we're not coming at our goals from a point of centeredness. So yes, I want to be an educator. I want to be a trainer. I want to be a consultant. But I can't go into my clients and then tell them exactly what they need to hear from me and what I want them to do, right? That's not going to work. Am I doing my homework to find out where they are coming from, where their needs are? What is their perspective? Because if I can see the world through a prism, and I'm not seeing the world as black or white because what I want is white, which is good, and what everybody else wants is black because, oh, they don't know, because I got this, and I'm going to tell them how it's not black and it's white, right? So we unwittingly put ourselves in a place where we cannot influence. Perspective taking and finding the centeredness actually gives us the power of influence. And why is the influence necessary? Research shows that we can each only influence three levels from where we are. So if I stake out an extreme black or white position of any issue, I've already put myself in the extreme. I always jokingly say it's called extreme because the minute I stake that position, I am an extremist, right? People don't realize that we can each be an extremist based on can we find our center or not. So when I come from the extreme right, I can only influence three levels towards the center. When I come from the extreme left of an issue, I can still only influence three levels towards the center. The operative word being towards the center. But what if I took the time and did my homework and took perspective? Just because a situation or an issue affects me a certain way doesn't mean it's going to affect everybody the same way. How do I understand that? And how do I see the entire rainbow by letting the light pass through the prism? And if I show up with the glory of all the colors in my spectrum, now all of a sudden life becomes fun. Imagine we all saw each other in black and white. There are some animals that can only see black and white. Imagine the amount of fun they miss, right? All of a sudden, I have the ability to influence three levels towards my right, three levels towards my left, and everybody else in the center. The fact still remains we can only influence three levels from where we are. But because where we have chosen to stand in that place of centeredness with perspective taking, I now have 3 levels to the right, 3 levels to the left, and everybody else in the center, 7 degrees of influence. This is a choice. It's a choice based on how we build our muscle memory, how we build our belief system, and how we therefore show up in the world and create behavioral patterns that become our values. And when we come from that place of centeredness, it doesn't matter how selfish our pursuit is, because our goal is to influence and succeed, we organically start building shared prosperity. And that is the magic and the beauty of what the universe is about. And Goldilocks is reminding us that we can transcend our staked out extreme positions. And in such a beautiful way, she becomes a role model all of a sudden. And she is not just a she, it can be a he, right? So whatever personality and energy we give her, it can be us. Think about even your purpose. Your purpose itself sits in the centeredness of what you love, what you're great at, and what the world needs. I will not be able to find my purpose or live my purpose if I cannot find the centeredness inside of me. And so Goldilocks and the process of finding the purpose is reminding us the journey starts from within. We got to have it in us to give. So my neighbor knocks on my door and says, you know what, I ran out of water. Can I please have a glass of water? But if my glass is already empty, I can't give her. But if I have a full glass, sure, I can give her half. I might even give her 3/4 because I have a way to fill my cup all over again. So purpose is one of those beautiful things that allows us to find our own center, and that wellspring of our own center, then we can pass it on. And magically, by design, our influence thrives and the shared prosperity happens. As we go into today's fabulous conversation, I want us to take 3 nuggets of wisdom into it. The first one is to transcend to seek your leadership influence. Don't get stuck. Connect with your being. Your being is larger than your physical self. Your being is about your spirit, your soul, your heart, where your heart, mind, body, and spirit all combines. And it truly is the source of your energy. It is where you as a being lives, right? So connect with your being and transcend all externalities to mindfully channel your doing, because doing is an action, being is a state. So find your state of being and anchor on it, and then channel all your doing so that your light and purpose are destined for a greater legacy. The second idea I want us to take into the conversation is the fact that the universe intentionally designed the woman. If the universe wanted our roles to be different, we may have been like seahorses where the men had the babies, right? Or we would be like penguins where the women laid the eggs and they went off to get the food, and the males held on to the eggs and hatched the eggs and waited for the woman to bring home the bacon, right? Human beings were designed intentionally differently by the universe. Let's embrace it. Just because we were designed differently for a purpose doesn't mean that we have to be treated differently. We can be treated with the same respect and the same recognition, but we understand the equity and the differences, right? Because that's part of the beauty. Imagine if we were all men or we were all women and there was only one gender. It would be boring. Really, really boring, right? So women were naturally designed to be able to multitask and parallel think. And it makes women a vital ingredient of organizational success. Because if everything happened sequentially, then we can only do one thing at a time. But there are times in our lives we have to be able to walk and chew gum, right? We can't walk and run at the same time, but we can walk and chew gum. And how do we make that happen? If every tool in my toolkit was a hammer, I am going to try to hammer everything in. And I might end up breaking things. I might end up disfiguring things. I may end up destroying things. There's a reason why in a toolkit there's a hammer and a screwdriver and a wrench and all kinds of other very intricate tools. Some require power, some require finesse. They're both needed. So let's embrace the fact that men and women are two sides of the same coin, but they have their intended purpose. And let's not treat a screwdriver like a hammer or a hammer like a screwdriver, because that's going to be messed up. And the third idea I want us to take into the conversation is the fact that how we treat women reflects who we are. The unassailable fact is that every human being came from the womb of a woman. So even I'm not a Christian, I'm Hindu, but if I draw my knowledge and experience in the Christian tradition, even the Son of God, Jesus Christ, came through the womb of a woman, Mary. He didn't fall from the sky, right? So the universe and the energy of the universe intentionally designed women for a purpose. And how we treat those women is a reflection of who we are, because we are each part of a woman. We came of a woman. How do we treat our predicate is a reflection of what we think of ourselves. So how we treat women in our environment is a measure of our collective self-respect. Do we have self-respect? Do we want to show up with self-respect? Do we want to build organizations that reflect that self-respect? Keep that in mind, because without self-respect, there is nothing. And without self-respect, we don't recognize the very essence of our being. So to have this fantastic conversation with me on the topic of transcendent leaders, women leadership, and post-pandemic workplace is a wonderful professional woman, Karen Ann Bullock, who is also a co-author of our upcoming anthology, Ennobling Business for Success. Karen, welcome to the program, and I am so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much, Cass. I am so excited to be here. What a wonderful introduction. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me give you a brief, very brief intro to who Karen is and what she brings to the table. And then when she starts talking, you are going to be blown away. Karen Ann Bullock is a transcendent leadership specialist and founder of Transcendence, Living a Life of Meaning, a boutique executive coaching practice. Karen partners with leaders to explore what matters, integrate the higher self, and flourish in new dimensions. She is the creator of the Transcendence Prosperity Methodology, Living a Life of Meaning, which provides transformative and integrative teachings learned from the 3 decades of applied practice. Karen was the first woman promoted to executive vice president at AM Best Company, the premier international insurance rating agency and information provider. Karen was a member on the board of directors for the AM Best Europe Information Services subsidiary and the parent company. Karen earned her Master of Science Organizational Leadership with honors from Regis University, Denver, Colorado, her professional coaching certification from IPEC, and her undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia. She has immersed herself in the study of the world's wisdom traditions and leadership models. She is the author of the Amazon best-selling novel, Ascending Ladders, and a contributing author to various international best-selling books. And as I mentioned earlier, she is the co-author for the upcoming book that is scheduled to launch in October, Ennobling Business for Success. Karen, as we come in and get started, Give us, in your own words, what brought you in your life journey to this place of transcendent leadership?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think it really had a lot to do with both my corporate journey and my personal journey, because one of the things that I've experienced in my life is obviously a great deal of success in my career, but also a great deal of pain and struggle in getting to that success, in getting to your point that you brought up so beautifully in your introduction, to getting to that level of respect, both personally and professionally, that allows me to be contributing at the highest level and really owning all of my power and owning all of my gifts and talents so that I can bring them forth in the world. And so I think it was the combination of the success overlaid with that pain, that level of pain and struggle that many women in the corporate environment experience, that really led me to want to do something about it, which is ultimately how Transcendence was born.
And very much so, right? It's not a profession you grow up saying you want to be in, because it's not one of those things where you're going to be an engineer, a doctor, you know, boys say they're going to be a firefighter, girls say they're going to be a teacher, right? It is different. You get there through lived experience.
Absolutely.
So my question is, as you got to this place, what fascinates you and excites you about the process of transcendence? And how are you able to pass it on? Because especially in the Western world, where people are raised to be consciously in the here and now and the outcome, because let's face it, the United States is a very old, and transcendence and embrace something that is nurturing out this femininity quality in everybody, because we all contain yin and yang. How does that happen, and what makes you excited about it?
Well, I think what makes me excited about it, I will start with that, is really my own journey and seeing how transcendence has made a difference in my life. Not that I can say that I've mastered every aspect of it, because it's such a big and intimidating word sometimes. But I've seen how even in those moments in our lives where we really achieve transcendence, where we really get connected to that level of universal consciousness that we allows us to rise above the crap that's going on in the world, the daily struggles, the trauma that are in our lives, in our work lives. When we truly experience those moments, it's just magic. I mean, really, that's where the magic happens. That's where the innovation happens. That's where the collaboration happens. That's where we can really take all of ourselves, to another level. And so that's what gets me excited about it, because it's so magical and so inspiring, and the results that you can achieve when you're in that mode are just incredible. But to your point, talking about it, especially in today's society, I think prior to the pandemic, it would have been difficult to do that. Mm-hmm. I think the pandemic has made a major shift in our collective awareness of what wasn't working, even though we thought it was, and where we need to go going forward. And not that we have all the answers yet, but I think the pandemic kind of broke open this old control and command leadership model that was already in the process of breaking down prior to it, just really hit a wall, basically. I mean, when you've got people that are panicking and people that are ill and dying and not able to come to the office, all of those things really created a fracture in the leadership model that just broke it wide open. And I think women were at the forefront of this. I think women saw that more than anything else because women have been the ones that had been leaving the workplace more than men. And obviously there's a lot of different factors that go into that. But I think really they realized that they, as a leader, were taking on that emotional trauma, not only for themselves and their families, but for the people that they were working with. And they realized, hey, this isn't working anymore. And so a lot of them left. I mean, we know those numbers. A lot of women left corporate. And, you and I have talked before, Cass, about how concerning that is for me personally, because the corporate workplace needs women. I don't think corporations are inherently bad organizations, although, a lot of people would say that, but I don't think they're inherently bad. They can be transformed and they need to be transformed and transcended. But I don't think you can do that with only men, right? I think you need a balance. And women leaving the workplace is really creating an imbalance or perpetuating the imbalance that already existed, making it worse. And so my real passion is to try to help the women that are still there, or maybe who have left and want to go back, really manage to do that, manage to transcend that pain and suffering that a lot of us female corporate executives have experienced, and bring light and transcendence into the workplace.
Brilliantly said. As much as the pandemic was awful in terms of life and life expectancy and health, from a human experience perspective, it truly has triggered a change, right? I always sit back and think all it took was a protein cell covered in fat to knock some blood. Even actually living, right? So you can't even give antibiotics to kill it, but it is just a cell. So how fragile were we? We were truly that fragile, but our egos were so big that we figured we could control everything and manage everything. And so as you're talking, what's coming to my mind is the reminder of my firm belief that we can only lead ourselves and then influence others. And for so long, the corporate culture and the traditional patriarchal, command and control structure has taken the approach that I lead you and I manage you and you just do what I tell you, right? And so this myth is busted. And my hope is that all of a sudden the world is no longer black or white. There's an entire array of rainbow colors. How beautiful is that? And now how do we weave something beautiful out of it with all the different colors? Because to me, gender is not binary. Somebody was asking me a question and I said, you know what? Binary logic is for computers. As human beings, we don't live and exist in a binary space. Gender is not binary. Life choices are not binary. And when we superimpose that falsehood, then we perpetuate something that is false.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about how are you helping organizations get past that binary world of men and women, and men are like this, women are like this. No, we're each capable of embodying the yin and the yang to different proportions. How do we give permission to women to embrace their masculinity of being outcome driven and results oriented? And how do we make it okay for men to realize I can be nurturing and life affirming and kind and gentle, and it doesn't take my masculinity away?
That is a great question. So I've got two answers for that, or two approaches to that. One is, the reason I use transcendence as my brand name, as intimidating a word as that is because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm sure you're familiar with it. And a lot of people saw the first iteration of it, which ended with self realization, right? And what a lot of people don't know is that at the end of his life, he actually added a sixth triangle up at the top that was called self-transcendence or transcendence. And that's really what inspired me for my brand name, because what he defined that is access to the highest and most inclusive level of consciousness available to humans. So to me, in translating that, that's access to that universal consciousness, that consciousness that understands that we are all connected to one another at a fundamental level, that we are not operating entirely independently, that everything that we do, say, think is a ripple effect, impacts you. Like this conversation that we're having today impacts you and I, everyone listening, and then the ripples go out to people that even aren't listening energetically, right? And quantum mechanics, quantum physics has proven that, right? So science actually has proven that we are all interconnected. And I think understanding that level of interconnectedness and being able to tap into that universal consciousness, that collective wisdom, right? Some people call it, the universe. Some people put, the name of a deity with it. However you relate to that level of consciousness where there's that wisdom. And I think, you mentioned when you were introducing me that I've studied, the world's wisdom traditions. And that's one of the things that I love about studying them, because there is so much wisdom in them. Yes, it's gotten overlaid with doctrine, which turns a lot of people off, particularly people in corporate America or corporates all over the world, right? But that connection to that universal consciousness, that wisdom that exists in the universe that's beyond our limited capabilities, is one of the ways that we can really break down gender, because everybody has access to it. It's not a female thing. It's not a male thing. That wisdom isn't a male thing or a female thing. It's accessible to all of us. And if we all are tapping into that wisdom, we're going to get perspective, to use, again, to refer back to how you introduced us, we're going to get perspective that is going to get us more centered, more balanced, and more able to see both sides of the picture, to see things from both male and female perspectives, regardless of what gender we happen to be, and to be able to bring that absolutely into the workplace. So one of the examples that I love to give with that is about risk taking. So if you look traditionally, under stress, which, okay, let's face it, most of us are under stress most of the time, particularly people in corporate environments. Under stress, men tend to take more risks. They tend to just go take risks. And women tend to play it safe. They tend not to take risks under stress. And the interesting thing about that is, if we work together as men and women, we can counterbalance it, because neither one is necessarily good, right? Going off and doing something crazy when you're stressed out makes about as much sense as not doing anything at all. But, we're wired biologically to do that. You can look at that. But it does, it also, when you're tapping into that level of higher consciousness, men and women can help balance themselves out, get to that place of centeredness, even themselves, to know, okay, yeah, this is a good risk to take. No, this is something that's crazy. I don't know whether you know this, Cass, but I used to be an aerobatic pilot. I used to turn airplanes upside down. And at the time I was doing it, only 1% of the pilots, the aerobatic pilots, were women. Most of them were men. Gee, they're not necessarily a surprise there. But again, it didn't stop me from doing that. Okay, maybe it stopped me from doing it a little, not too long. I didn't do it for too long, but it expanded my capacity to understand and take risks in a way that, again, made it easier for me to relate to men and easier to tap into my masculine energy in my personal life and at work.
And very well said. Life and life circumstances give us the opportunity to stretch. And those of us who choose intentionally can surround ourselves with men and women who bring that balance, right? The one thing I love about the co-author community that we have built as we've taken this journey of anthology, we don't have many men, but we have a couple of good men who are comfortable with their femininity side. And we have women who are comfortable with their masculinity. And it makes for a vibrant journey. It makes for a vibrant experience because we need both. We need the yin and the yang because that's what makes the world go around. And as we start thinking about women and women in the workplace and inclusion, one of the things I've always observed is because the Western world needs to know the outcome first before we are willing to do anything, we always put the outcome as the first step. So diversity is the outcome. I want cake. Okay, fine. But you just can't stand there and say, I want cake, I want cake. Cake doesn't magically appear. So the first thing that has to happen is inclusion. And when we bring about inclusion, then we have to go through the natural progression of creating equity for the diversity to happen. So I always take the DEI and flip it upside down, because if we don't start with addressing the root cause, we're never going to have the outcome. If I don't have egg and flour and sugar, there ain't going to be any cake, right? So how do we get folks to understand the outcome is good? That's the vision you want. But we collectively need to go and do the work. And inclusion starts with me embracing. So one of the things I'm always gobsmacked about is people talk about inclusion, but they only talk about inclusion in their language, in their cultural religious context. Every organization that talks about inclusion, do they encourage their people to learn other languages? If the corporate headquarters is in the United States, when they go to their office in Latin America, because I'm basing this on an actual experience, and Wolfgang can attest to this, why do you go there and then make people feel bad about not speaking English when culturally that is not their native tongue and they're not a bilingual country? So if they're willing to work for your company and build your organization and sell the products, why go there and insult them? And why can't we, as those who believe in inclusion, then learn languages, embrace the different cultures, and show up in a place of appreciation instead of saying inclusion is for everybody else and now do what we tell you to do because you're now an American company, right? How do we get past that? Because every American company trains their foreign workers to speak and function better in English, but I have never seen the executives in the corporate office make the effort to learn the other languages and show up mindfully in those other cultures.
Yes, that is an excellent question. I will say, just the company that I used to work for did have executives that spoke Spanish when they went to the Mexican office that we had and did that. So in their defense, they did a good job with that, even though they were an American company. But anyway, really, it all starts with yourself. And I think one of the things that I realized, even for myself this week, as I continue to go on my journey of transcendence, is that it's very hard to appreciate other people and to really be inclusive with other people when you don't appreciate and include yourself. And I think one of the things that we all struggle with is these little traps in our brains, in our psyches, that keep us from often really accepting ourselves. And I think that's particularly true in the American culture because there's so much expectation. You've got to, go to the right schools, get straight A's, make the dean's list, excel at sports, succeed in business, There's so many things that we are expected to do, right? And we get caught in that trap that we're expected, and then we become our own worst inner critics. And I'm not saying this is exclusive to the American culture, because I think certainly this goes on in plenty of other cultures as well. But I think it is true here. And I know myself, what I have found over the years, and one of the reasons that Transcendence has worked so well for me personally, is doing that inner work to realize, hey, there's a whole lot of inner critic going on. There's a whole lot of self-judgment that's going on. And when you're judging yourself and you're criticizing yourself, trust me, you're judging and criticizing everybody else too, because it's just part of the process. And so the key is for leaders of those organizations to do the inner work themselves, to do that inner work, to be aware of their biases, to be aware of their judgments, whether they're self-judgments or judgments of others. Because once you can clear that in yourself, then it's so much easier to appreciate other people. And, I know my journey, I started out in a family, my father, you saw the word complain in the dictionary, and my father's picture is next to it. And I love my dad dearly. I really did. But, he complained about everything all the time. There was just such a level of judgment. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I learned. So transcending that judgment, because obviously it was internally focused as much as externally focused, transcending that level of judgment has been just so freeing for me. And it's allowed me to open up and be more inclusive in my life. And one of the things I love about my life right now is the diversity of people and the diversity of friends, from all over the world that I have now. That if you had told me this when I was in my teens or even in my 20s, I would have laughed at you about where I am now. But that's been part of my journey of transcendence. And that's the journey that leaders need to take, because really the shift starts with us. And you have to shift yourself and your self-judgment before you can shift your inclusion outwardly.
Beautifully said. And I love you including that self piece, because research shows that what triggers us is the things that we don't like about us. Mm-hmm. So if we can connect with ourselves and come to terms with what triggers us within us, then we can stop things that are triggering us externally. So that is brilliantly said. So one last question I have before I open this up for discussion with our live audience here is, as we build a workplace that is inclusive of women and respects and honors women and what they bring to the table, there is a requirement to understand and accept the fact that a woman's work is not all just paid work. Women have a paid job and an unpaid job. The unpaid work of the woman is what is defined as the kin work, the things we do for our loved ones, for our families, for our communities. And every single day, collectively in the world, women produce $1 billion worth of work for no pay. Okay. So when a man says, you know what, after dinner, can we have a quick call? I want to finalize this before our client meeting tomorrow. Sure, I can, but I might be prepping for tomorrow morning's lunch because I have to cook before I come. So I don't mind if you put it on Zoom, but I'm going to be in my apron cutting vegetables. Are you okay with it? I intentionally ask these questions. And even if I have nothing to do, I start cutting vegetables. Create that mindset that you need to understand that we have an unpaid part of the work. And it doesn't make us less than. In fact, it makes us better than, because the very fact that you exist is because some woman carried you to term for 9 months. And, she raised you, and now you have a spouse or a significant other who's doing some of these things for you. Men don't think about it. And when a man says, I'm going to sleep, he can go to sleep. When a woman says, I'm going to sleep, she has to make sure the stove is turned off, everything is prepped for tomorrow, the children have everything they have to go to school for. Everything is it takes a half an hour, right? And how do we create the awareness for women that they need to speak up and accept the fact that they have a paid and unpaid job? And the workplace to accept the fact that if the women don't hold down the household, there is nobody to come to work. So the unpaid work is still work. And how do we stop defining work as paid work?
That is an excellent question, because it's so true. And actually, I will say in my particular household, we have a little role reversal there because my husband is the one that chops the vegetables and jumps off the Zoom calls in between and is prepping dinner when he has a break in his workday. So I am a recipient of that. And as a recipient of that, I have to tell you, I am incredibly grateful for it. But one of the things I do see with even with him is, you're right, the lack of respect for people's boundaries. And one of the things that we have to teach people how to do is set boundaries, because boundaries are how we teach other people how to treat us. Mm-hmm. And we have created a society where not only is it difficult for people to set boundaries, particularly women, right? In the workplace, it's not acceptable to say no. We have to change that, because no matter who it is, whether it's, man, woman, or whatever in between, we need to be able to say no. We need to be able to say, hey, I have something else that I have to take care of that is more important than prepping for this meeting. Maybe I can get up early tomorrow morning and prep for this meeting, but tonight I've got my kid's piano recital to go to, or I've got my kid's basketball game to go to. And one of the things, I had a male coworker, and one of the things I really respected about him is he made it a priority to go to his boys' basketball games. And he would leave work early in the day, despite the corporate pressure not to do so. He would leave and go to his son's basketball games. Now, granted, he was at work at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it wasn't like he hadn't put in a full 8 hours of work before he did it. But we have to, I really admired him for standing up to the corporate culture and saying, no, I'm going to leave. But women need to be able to do that too. And we need to be able to create a work environment where, are you getting your work done? Not what time are you putting in? And so many people are still focused on, you've got to put in X amount of hours a day, regardless of whether it makes sense or not, right? So learning to be flexible, learning to accept people's boundaries and set your own boundaries, because let's face it, a lot of the reason that people don't honor other people's boundaries is they're not setting them themselves, right? To go back to what I said earlier about, you've got to do the work yourself first, and you've got to do the work and be able to understand, this is what's important to me, this is what I value, and this is where I'm going to set boundaries in my life. And boundaries aren't rigid walls, right? Boundaries can be flexible depending on the circumstances, but do you know what's really important? And are you honoring what's really important in your life? And if people in an organization are really important, which obviously there is no organization without people, then how do we respect them? How do we set boundaries? And how do we learn as an organization to set boundaries and respect them? Be able to say, no, I can't take that call at 6 o'clock because it's really important for me to sit down and have dinner with my family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to have boundaries for ourselves. And when we set boundaries, human relationships are very much like laying down tiles, right? If they laid them down right the first time, everything will be perfect. If we don't do it, then we're going to be constantly repairing. So doing it right the first time is so important. Let me open this up for a conversation and take a couple of questions from the live audience. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in. I thought Cecilia or Wolfgang would jump in since you already had your faces on, but I absolutely love that you talked about Maslow, and there's so much going into that story, the pyramid and how transcendence got left off, and and the transcendence of looking beyond yourself, looking beyond what do I want, what do I need, but going into a service mode. What does the world need, what do other people need? And so in your work, how do you, and there's tons of research going into that being of service to someone is one of the best ways to get yourself out of a bad mood. And so in your work, how do you go about helping people, still taking into account boundaries and all of that, but move into I'm going to be of service. How can I help? How can I show up with wanting to contribute and not just take mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robin. And there's a couple of ways that I do that. One is, again, to go back to what I said about awareness and helping people be aware of what their unconscious biases are, to use, the term, because sometimes those are, like, for instance, honestly, for me, for a long time, I had this bias against service. The word service made me crazy. Why? Because I saw my mother be of service to everyone and never get her needs filled. And so I actually associated service for a long time with weakness and slavery, really, because that's kind of what I saw growing up. I mean, when I grew up, I was like, I don't want to be like my mom, because all she does is give to everybody, and she never gets anything of what she wants, which obviously isn't the right answer either. So one of it is awareness, is helping people develop an awareness of where their mental blocks are around something like that. And then the second thing that's really important is clarity, is really getting clear on what your values are, what's really important to you. And most of the time, when you really dig into to people's values, other people, whether it's their families, their community, some cause, there's something that they really care about that's really important to them, that really is going to result in an act of service. And so if you deal with the awareness piece and the clarity, getting really clear, and I really help my clients get really clear on what their values are. That's a big piece of what I do, exploring what matters to them. If you have that awareness and that clarity, and then you end up with purpose. If you take those two things and you end up with purpose, and you see where you can help. And a lot of times your purpose is going to be tied to the things that that were hard, where you had blocks that were hard for you. I mean, because often, I know they always say for coaches, you're your own first client, right? But I think for a lot of people, what they've overcome in their lives are often what they're passionate about and what they want to serve for, and that creates a basis for their purpose. So to me, it's the combination of getting awareness and getting clarity on your values that creates the purpose, and then the impulse to serve.
Great. Yeah, that's a nice flow of, find your purpose and then find your values, and there will be service within that.
Yeah.
Appropriate.
Almost always. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Lovely question, as always, Robin. And I love how you integrated the transcendence and the purpose into giving perspective, Karen. And what reminds me is, when we find that right spot, the words we use, the actions with we show up, all of that resonates our purpose and how we are going to be serving, and people receive that, right? And so how do we intentionally craft our words, our actions, our body language? Because communication is almost 70% plus is nonverbal. How are we showing up authentically so that people understand that I'm here to serve, but also setting those boundaries, saying just because I'm kind and I'm willing to serve doesn't make me somebody you can take advantage of, because that's the other thing. It's in a survival-based culture where life is win or lose. If I serve, then somebody is going to take advantage of me, therefore I'm not going to offer, becomes the self-talk. But if I can say I'm ready to serve, but here are the parameters and here are the boundaries, setting the boundaries up is so important. And to me, that is one of the things that have worked. And be willing to put the hammer down when somebody crosses that boundary.
Oh, absolutely. Boundaries are a key part of all of this, because without that, obviously that was my mom's problem. She did not set boundaries. She didn't set boundaries with her mother, with my father, or even, with my brother and I, to a large degree. Although somehow she did with me more than the others. But anyway,
She was training you.
she was training me, right? Exactly. But no, but you're absolutely right, and that's really one of my big learnings over, my willingness and my passion to serve at this point is I've learned that, okay, I can say no. I don't have to do everything all the time. I can serve, but I have to fill my cup up first, right? I can't serve from an empty cup. And that makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Wolfgang. I can see your question forming. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I had to come off mute. I think Dr. Cass can read my mind just over the airwaves. No, first of all, thank you, Karen. I think that is a great way of showing, all the different challenges and talking about transcendence. Something that you said really struck to me because I currently still work in corporate America, and actually, you were making me feel pretty good about the place where I work because we do have a work from anywhere kind of policy. And I was thinking of examples of people who have set those boundaries. And the more I thought about it, they were mostly men. Because I have one of my presidents who I have a lot of respect and affection for. His children do sports. I think it's tennis, and many times says I cannot do it between 4 and 6 because that's when the tennis matches or when whatever. So he tends to that. So what I think all our employees and many of them is creating an environment where they can declare their boundaries and they feel safe declaring those boundaries. So any thoughts from your experience and your research, or what could they do, or how could we help them declare those boundaries, or at least feel comfortable doing that?
Well, I think you brought up a great point in saying, that, one of the leaders in your company does that. And I think really leadership, the corporate culture comes from the top. And when we all know that, it's obvious we say that, but it's so often I see there's still that do as I say, not as I do environment in companies. And it's really the leadership that has to say, look, we're going to let people declare their boundaries. There may be some negotiation, right? I mean, it's not going to be necessarily willy-nilly, people can do whatever they want, and they need to understand that too. But let's create, okay, our managers, our leaders having meetings with their subordinates and saying, okay, what are your boundaries? What's important to you now? And how can we work with you to create a space where that works most of the time? Maybe not 100% of the time, but most of the time. And then are they having that conversation down the line? But how many I don't know that no one ever had a conversation with me about what my boundaries were in an organization. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't remember having those conversations either, but that's just something that I've learned. And would, if I could do it differently, I would do it differently now. But having that conversation, whether it's in the workplace or even in your families, because you've got to have that conversation with your spouse and your children. That's a great conversation to have with your children, because that will teach them that at this point. So really, in my mind, it's the leaders taking the initiative to have the conversations is the best way to do that.
Yeah, because sometimes people get into the situations where maybe they decide to leave because something was not happening. When you ask them, did you tell your manager about that? They go, no. Okay, it's like your managers don't have a crystal ball either, So somehow they need to encourage and have that courage to speak up and declare the boundaries. So
yeah, and asking for what you want is something that's really important. And I actually wrote one of my blogs about this just recently, because it just struck me as women in particular don't ask for what they want. And to your point, men are often the ones that set the boundaries because they're not afraid to ask for what they want, whereas women often are afraid to ask for what they want. And yes, women need to not be afraid to do that, to ask for what they want. But corporate leaders also need to be receptive. So it's a two-way street.
Very much so. And modeling the
Thank you very
behavior
much.
sets up the tone for everything. Thank you for that wonderful question, Wolfgang. And lovely, brilliantly crafted answer, Karen. Susie, go ahead.
Hi, Karen, that was absolutely fascinating. I was just looking at the global picture of what you so eloquently verbalized around the impact that COVID had on corporate women. And I saw that very much in Australia as well, where the impact of women having to manage their work, but also being in lockdown with children and managing that whole environment really took a toll on them. So it's absolutely inspiring to see some of the work that you're doing. My question, I guess, is around the doing and the being with women. And Cass and I had a discussion yesterday or earlier today around sometimes with women as well, for women to give themselves the permission to be, and in just being rather than continuous. There is so much to do, and as you so correctly put, that unpaid work, to actually have time to sit quietly and do that inner work in being. How do you advise them, or what steps do you suggest that women take to create that mind shift, to allow themselves or give themselves permission to actually stop and do that inner work, find the time to do the inner work in just being?
Well, that can be challenging. That's a good question, because it can be very challenging because a lot of people resist it. But I think I usually encourage people to try it a little bit at a time, right? You don't have to go from doing nothing to meditating an hour a day, right? You can start even as small as a 2-minute increment. Take 2 minutes when you get out of bed in the morning, or set your alarm for 2 minutes earlier and lay in bed and do a meditation, a visualization, something to connect to that universal consciousness, that higher level of being. And it's amazing if people will at least be receptive to even that one tiny increment, that they can see pretty quickly how much it changes things. I mean, I had a conversation with a few women not too long ago, and a number of us were talking about how we take breaks during the day, right? Go outside, take a walk, even just go outside and pace around my deck for 5 minutes, just to get out of the environment, and how much that makes me more productive later in the day. And I think that's one thing that women don't always realize, and men too. I mean, because I know men that fall into the same trap where you have to be busy, busy, busy all the time. And what I do when I work with people is help them just say, okay, it doesn't have to be something big. Just do a couple little things, maybe 2 minutes, 3 times a day, start. And it doesn't take long for them to see the value of it. But I think the easiest part, just to start small.
Thank you. Wonderful question, Susie. Thank you so much. And Karen, we have to wrap this up, obviously. We're on a scheduled time, but I want to make sure I give you 30 to 60 seconds to share with everybody how they can get in touch with you, how they can find you, so that the conversations can continue offline with you directly.
Yeah, I would love to keep having conversations with people. The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, Karen Ann Bullock. That's my LinkedIn name and URL, or my website is easylivingaliFeofmeaning.com. So those are the 2 easiest ways to find me. And I would love to continue this conversation. It's been great today. And I appreciate everybody who chimed in and asked questions. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for making the time to be open to talk about your topic, your purpose, your passion. And everybody be sure to mark your calendars. October 5th is the book launch, and Karen talks about what she has been sharing with everybody today. So you do not want to miss it. And thank you to our live audience for coming prepared, talking about this, engaging, and making this conversation truly a lived experience that continues to have ripple effects. As we bring this conversation to a close today, I want us to remember every human interaction is an opportunity for transformation. So go out there and pass on the ripple effects and continue to transform lives. And in that process, please be sure to take a moment, reflect, and transform yourself.